Okay, I'm trying to remember where I am. Okay, chapter 9 left off where God had just been providing. So, in May, a synod meeting was held, which brought about another split. Differences flared up in hot discussion. Accusation was leveled. You're not reformed. However, two other factors entered in. The majority of men at Westminster held a view called Christian liberty, while others felt strongly there was a list of things which the, quote, separated Christian could not do. Differences in the views of prophecy also came into the taking of sides. Fran got involved. We both had strong opinions and positions. Fran would come home to the apartment from these meetings and scarcely taste the beautifully cooked end-of-the-day bargains I had scrounged in the market to find. He was all steamed up, and I would listen and get all steamed up too. We might as well have been eating sawdust. There was a cause to be fought for, and the decks had to be cleared to get on with it. We felt that any sacrifice would not be too much to do the, quote, right thing in the midst of all this. After having lived on through the history of our lives to 1981, we now think back. So she's writing this in 1981, but thinking back to in the 1930s. We now think back to that summer of 1937 with mixed thoughts and feelings. This is true of so many things in the fallen world. Perhaps it is always easier to understand in retrospect. A new church was formed, and every person wanted to be his perfect church. With that in mind, it's easier to be more understanding. Other things entered in too. Dr. Machen had died, and there was a struggle for leadership. We still think the first two things that troubled us at that time are crucial. The issues of Christian liberty and differing views of prophecy should have been settled in patience over a number of years within the denomination. Looking back on that time, we wish we could have been less intense, less steamed up. Certainly we would not now say some of the things we said then. We'd be glad if we could erase them. Don't you feel that way about a lot of things?
So many things I feel like that about. It's so great to hear her say that.
As years have gone by, we have said to the men involved that we were sorry. So often in differences among Christians, it's not the issues themselves that continue tensions years later. With such differences, whether in the relationships within the families, between husband and wife, or in the church, it is the things said with harshness or in anger or in the midst of speaking of issues that stick in the memory and still hurt years later. Often the sharpness of the issues has softened, yet sitting and quietly talking still is put off. As you know from Fran's letters from college, he had been troubled by the chip on the shoulder attitude then as he was trying to choose a seminary. That factor did not change his realization that we must struggle against liberalism when it enters a church or a denomination. As we look back over life now, realizing how brief time is, we're extremely thankful that we have not used all our time to struggle against liberalism within our own denomination, but have been freed to go on with a positive work. That's really important. Freed to go on with a positive work. Having said all that, Having said all that, we are troubled by the lack of love at that time, and we realize that we got caught up in the cause so passionately that we ourselves did not show the balance we would struggle for if we could live that section of history over again. There was still another 18 years, however, during which we had much, much more to learn in the struggle for balance. You know, there is a sad thing about history. As we learn things, grow, discover mistakes, recognize where we took a detour or failed to clean up weeds, and then try to direct others into the cleared up path, the climbers who are slogging up the mountain behind us insist on blazing their own trail. Then in not heeding any warnings or markings and in leaving the traveled path along which more progress could be made for their new rough one, so their distance in the end is not added to in the way it might have been. Pity. Yet that's how we feel as parents, don't you think? Yet how patient God is with us, dealing so gently with us and working through us, each of us, with whatever few fish and bread bits we hand over to him in our eagerness to give our all to him, with some measure of understanding in the face of some measure of sacrifice. So, there were to be a new church and a new seminary, both of which would fulfill all the dreams and have all the right balances and emphasis. This time, we are really on the way. Practically, What happened was that a board was formed to commence Faith Theological Seminary, and Dr. Samuel Laird invited the seminary to hold its classes in the Sunday school rooms of his church building right across the street from the Baltimore and Ohio Railway Station in Wilmington, Delaware. What difference did the B&O make? Well, any man who was a student at that time or who taught there then will know what a pivot of interest was the swift passage of the Royal Blue Express from New York to Washington, D.C. Whether the subject being taught at the time was Hebrew verbs or church history, there was a general rush to the window. Doug and John Young, Francis Schaeffer, John Sanderson, Art Glasser, Delbert Jorgensen, James Lipscomb, Walter Cross, Homer Emerson, Vernon Grounds, Robert Hastings, Norman Jerome, Jack Murphy, Philip Stutzman, and others, all dignified older men by now, made a general exodus from their seats while McCrae was shouting, "Sit down," or some other professor was having his own brand of cat fits. And they would stay at the window until the royal blue disappeared. Many years later, my father was to go with my mother to meet that train during its 2-minute stop at the Wilmington station. My niece Lydia had gone with them to point out Jane Stuart Smith, whom she had known at L'Abri, so that they could rush to the spot where Jane would lean dramatically out of the window to drop a diamond pin into their outstretched hands. The pin had been brought from England, a gift to L'Abri for the English trips, given by a lady in Ireland. But that is away in the future, and now the royal blue is no more. However, it was to figure in the lives of all of us through a number of years, in diverse and amazing ways. After Dr. Laird's invitation was accepted by the board, they dispersed for the summer, and Dr. McCrae, who was to be president of the new seminary, began to work on details, along with Fran, who worked for him for that summer. Into all this, Priscilla was born on June 18th, our first baby. Did the world stop moving for our so titanic event? Fran had rushed me to the hospital with a police escort, getting into the scene, first to arrest him for fast driving, then to go along to protect mother and child. After a night of what we then called labor pains, which have turned into contractions now, these turned out to be false labor. Fran, arriving anxiously in the morning with a 99-cent drugstore electric fan to cool you off during labor, was disgusted and even angry that I had gone backwards in this whole process. It was an embarrassing thing to him, and he wasn't a bit sympathetic. A week later, we were to come again at exactly 7 p.m., my water having burst during supper with Mother and Dad, and Priscilla was born at 11:20 p.m. Now, had natural childbirth been practiced then, I would have been an excellent subject, but it wasn't. No one had given me any exercises or breathing help, so I did all the wrong things, like clutching the bed and tensing all my muscles. Ether was given rectally, which burned like fire and seemed to add to the general discomfort. Then, as the baby was coming more rapidly than anyone had anticipated, I was rushed into the delivery room and a mask of ether placed over my twisting away from and trying not to take face. As Priscilla entered the world, it was to not breathe for half... What? As Priscilla entered the world, it was to not breathe for a half hour. The nurse there, a daughter of Dr. McQuelkin, knew we were Christians and rushed out past Fran in the hall, weeping, certain there would soon be tragic news for us. Oxygen was given the baby, no go. Then Dr. Taylor gave her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation and started her breathing. No cry came, but she was living. Why isn't Priscilla a hopelessly brain-damaged person? The Lord had another pattern for her life, is all I can say. The why comes in both directions in life. And again, we have to say, there is a reality of God in answering prayer. There is a reality of a young father praying in the hall, terrified by the silence of the delivery room. And there is the reality of the sovereignty of God. The whys of life and of death are not to be understood until we finally are where we can see more of the tapestry than we can see today. Priscilla, however, her husband, her 3 children, and later another generation will hold their breath as they read this over her first breath, realizing how many people's breathing was tied in with that sudden intake of air into that baby's lungs. Can you imagine that?
No.
30 minutes?
That's got... I mean, maybe it's true. I can't imagine.
It's got to be wrong on the timing. Is that what you're thinking? Yeah. The mystery of being, we never get to the end of it. Visiting hours were afternoon and evening. Mother, please don't let anyone come in the evening hour from 8 to 9, as that is the only time Fran can come. Everyone complied. But Fran was working with McCrae in a downtown office on all the details of the new seminary, outlining what had to be done in Wilmington before the opening date in September. And McCrae, a bachelor at that time, was not exactly in tune with my eager waiting in the hospital. I would carefully get a basin of water brought to me. Remember, in those days it was a 2-week stay, and the whole thing of not being allowed to get up and walk was a part of that error. Now past, and wash, brush my hair, and braid it, tie blue or pink or black velvet ribbons on the ends of the 2 braids, put on a fresh nightgown with a bed jacket, and arrange myself into what I thought would be a fetching picture of a young mother awaiting her husband. The minutes would go, and go, and go, and the precious hour would be almost up, only 5 or 10 minutes left. By the time Fran would rush into the room with, "Oh, I'm so sorry, McCrae asked me to," I'd be brushing away my tears, determined not to let the only time we had to be spoiled, and all too soon the nurse would appear at the door with a bundle. "Time to go," she would say, "babies are being fed." No fathers, germs allowed in those days. "Oh, please, my husband just came from work. Please take all the others first and bring mine a little bit later." A few minutes to squeeze in all that was to be said about the beginning pains of preparing a new seminary and our loneliness for each other and the ins and outs of my very troubles, needing molasses and milk, enemas. What? And the baby's x-ray treatment for an enlarged thymus gland, and whish, the time was over. So very, very often, life's preciously awaited, centrally important times, to be undisturbed times, one-in-a-lifetime times, are melanged with the battle of trying to live in a balance of first things first. No one can know when he or she is having the most priceless alabaster box of perfume to pour on the Lord's feet, saying, "This, Lord, you are worthy of receiving." Hey, would you get me a glass of water, no ice? Thanks. Even if it seems too much from a human viewpoint of evaluating importance, no one knows when he or she is having a rare opportunity to say to the Lord, "Thank you for saying a cup of cold water given in my name has value, is accepted, is remembered, is worthwhile to you." My cup of cold water in those 2 weeks was a giving a precious time with my husband to the new seminary, but really to the Lord. Some days the gift was annulled by my feeling resentments. I didn't want any ice, baby. A month later, we were given the commission of going to Wilmington and looking for, finding, selecting houses, quote, suitable for students, and oh yes, quarters for married students, and a house for faculty apartments from beginning seminary in September. So it was that one hot July morning we left Priscilla with her adoring grandmother Seville and drove off on a wild goose chase, which turned into an afternoon of being amazed at the answer to prayer the Lord gave us. The only cash we had was $40, which belonged to Priscilla's first piggy bank. Thanks. 3 $10 gifts and 2 $5 gifts had been sent to us with welcome baby cards, and we took all this along just in case. After being told we have nothing by several real estate dealers, Fran started to drive within a small radius of the church where classes would be held. And with breathless astonishment, we found on one block of 14th Street, just a 2-block walk from the church, 4 houses with big for rent signs on them, 3 with a different real estate company's name, and 1 with the owner's name and phone number. Within an incredibly short time, we had put a $10 down payment on each of the 4 houses. One was to be the student's house with a living room for the students' general use. One was to be apartments for some of the professors. Others would rent elsewhere. And 2 were to be made into apartments for married students. They were 3-story houses, and although the one for students was bigger, the others were 3 rooms deep or 4 rooms deep, so that they could be broken up into an apartment on each floor. The check handed Fran to, quote, get the necessary things to make those houses ready to live in was woefully small. So Fran began charging around Philadelphia to all the junkyards, piling through the chaos to find sinks, stoves, toilet bowls, bathroom wash basins, making sure they had no cracks or chipped places. The average price he paid was $5 apiece. By going to widely separated places, he found enough to do it. Excelsior! Now for second-hand stores to find, quote, good furniture for the student lounges and enough student beds to start with. The others would have to furnish their own places. For extremely low prices, we found enough decent pieces, and also for us, a couch and chair that were in good condition and comfortable at $10 for the two as a set. Leaving the baby with Mother again, we went to Wilmington, this time for Fran to look up plumbers and electricians and get promises from them to do the work in time. Our next trek was to the Bancroft mills to look for mill ends and march down bolts of cotton materials to make curtains and slipcovers for the student living room, and curtains and slipcovers for ours. Again, the most expensive stuff we got was 35 cents a yard for 50-inch wide material. The good old days, eh? We were now ready to move. Moving day was one of the worst days in our lives, yet a day which Fran looks back to as one of the most important in his life. He thinks of it as a day when he learned one of the most valuable lessons spiritually that he ever learned. One of those never to be forgotten times of reality in the Christian life. Try to picture it, if you have a good imagination. The usual packing had taken place. Books in boxes, newspaper wrapped dishes in bushel baskets, lamps standing hopefully ready, the bed taken apart, medicines and soaps and groceries all in shoe boxes or grocery boxes. The usual chaos, plus the things to be ready to use right away, like the diapers, oil for baby's bottom, damp face cloth at hand, and, oh yes, we'll have to feed her on the way. A big complication, however, loomed on the horizon like a black cloud. Are we ready? Then, says Fran, I'll go with the truck and get the junk. What junk? You may well say. You see, all the sinks, stoves, toilet bowls, and so on, plus the second-hand furniture. About 6 stops in varying places had to be picked up with Fran guiding the truck driver as a starter. All our moving was to be put on top of this charming load of stuff. A most irate Fran returned a couple of hours later. They tried to cheat me at a couple of places. I had to try all that stuff again and look for cracks and leaks. It wasn't all the same junk I had so carefully chosen. Then, what have you been doing? Why isn't the baby dressed? Hurry! And as the man helped Fran carry all the lumpy, awkward stuff down the narrow stairs, and things bumped and fell and became heavier on the way down, the irateness grew. Broken. That infuriates me. No sense to it, and so on. Finally, our Model A Ford was packed with the more precious things, and Mother had squeezed herself into the back seat in the few inches of space left. I got into the front seat with a very recently fed baby. The rain poured down and fog misted up from the hot streets. The truck got out of sight. A red light blinked on at the wrong time. A wrong turn was taken. One thing after another happened, and Fran got angrier with each thing. Suddenly, the sweetly dressed pink and white baby, looking like a rosebud, emitted from both ends at once. A gush of so recently swallowed food came up over my shoulder, down my back, splashed over the seat back, while simultaneously a rush of what could have been mustard leaked forth from both sides of the beautiful white knitted soakers, with diapers carefully pinned under them, and covered my lap, my legs, and my shoes. Can't you even take care of that baby? Don't you know how to put on diapers? What is the matter with you? Suddenly another thing happened. Within seconds, Fran had skidded, and our car had slid into another car on the slippery street. It might have been a bad accident, but it wasn't. My instant thought was, oh, now he'll really be mad. But the reaction was entirely different. Fran said he instantly felt as if God had spoken to him. He didn't hear a voice, but he was very vividly conscious of Hebrews 12:11, and he said aloud so that Mother and I both heard him, "All right, Lord, I'm sorry. It's enough." He felt a great calm and peace, recognizing something he never forgot again. It was not that he never got angry again. That wasn't it. But it was that he saw something very profound concerning chastening. He was sure for himself that one thing after another had been allowed by the Lord in a cumulative way to bring him up short, to bring him to a place of saying to the Lord, "I'm sorry." and of discovering just what is meant by chastening, producing the peaceable fruit of righteousness. In those who are really, quote, exercised thereby, and those who come to a point of saying, okay, Lord, I do get the message, I'm sorry. This was one of those times of a nail in the wall being put up in Fran's own Christian life, and he felt it was a thing which took him to Wilmington to face all that was ahead in a better state of understanding and quietness. Ladies who are still living and who were in Dr. Laird's Faith Bible Presbyterian Church at that time remember taking care of Priscilla as a 2-month-old baby during their missionary meeting the day we moved in. I soon set up shop for a kind of sewing different from what I'd been used to, as I turned the lengths of cloth into curtains and slipcovers for the student lounge and for our own living room. Our summer days lasted from early morning till late night, as the plumbers and electricians added their work to ours. By the opening date, the students, faculty, board, and friends of the seminary came to an opening tea, served in the room we had just finished. Decorations consisted of arrangements made from flowers some of the ladies brought from their gardens, beginning of hidden art training for us. People arrived, Doug and Snook, Laird and Libby Harris, and John Sanderson, now Dr. Sanderson of Covenant Seminary, asking, where is the campus? We explained to each new student that the house across the street, plus the other houses on that ordinary American tree-lined street, and the church around the corner were, quote, it. Fran had prepared a dossier of my father's credentials for teaching beginning Greek and missions, and Mother and Father were installed very soon in the bottom apartment of the faculty house with the Harrises above them. It became an unforgettable year for me, a never-to-be-repeated year of living across the street from my parents, to say nothing of the fact that with Mother leading them, the wives' prayer meetings were something so warm and special that many people look back to her as their spiritual mother in many areas of understanding. Father taught at Faith for 17 years before he retired to be Home Secretary, so to speak, of L'Abri in 1955, the year L'Abri started. He was 80 years old at that time. Graduation day came, with Fran having been the first student to register at Faith. He also had kept his record of top marks, as he had straight ones, in all his subjects. He also was the first pastor to be ordained in the Bible Presbyterian Church, as he graduated in the first graduating class. The outstanding moment of Faith graduation ceremonies, as far as I was concerned, was the singing of Give Tongues of Fire to Preach Thy Word by the whole student body as they stood on the platform together. My eyes sting with tears just writing about it. What a plea to the Lord. What a longing in hearts of young men. Yet, how easy it is for something to get in the way of its becoming a reality, especially with an enemy trying to put hindrances in the way of doing just that, or even the reality of caring to do that. During the year we were to be in the United States just before L'Abri was to start, Fran was to preach in many places a sermon which he called Give Tongues of Fire to Preach Thy Word, subtitled The Lord's Work and the Lord's Way. Do read that sermon in his book, No Little People. That sermon was to be preached before L'Abri had ever been dreamed of, and it was to be preached 15 years after his graduation. But as we walked out into the warm May night along tree-lined 14th Street, we were filled with emotion, looking back over this stormy yet so fulfilling year, looking forward to what? An unknown future. My silent plea to the Lord was made with a strong rush of fervency. Please, Lord, give Fran a tongue of fire to preach your word. Never let the fire cool off. And that's the end.
Amen.
That was really good.
Very good.